to really project in this space, and so that our cameras and our interpreters on Zoom can hear us all right. And Linda, let me know if they can't hear well enough. I can get louder.
Thank you.
I hope you all are doing well today, and welcome to our first artist talk in 2 years. So, we really appreciate you guys coming, and you know, the gallery. Linda, can you pull up just a little bit so you're not so close to the art? Sorry. It's okay. Sorry, just slide a little, that's all. There you go.
I'm asking if it could be a little louder, so I'm moving closer.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so obviously we were closed last year, so it's been a really honor to get this back up and running, to have Carl here to talk with us today, and to bring back a little bit of sense of normalcy to the campus and to our community. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lindsay Guile. I'm a professor here at DCC. I'm also the gallery director, and this is Carl Grauer, who is the artist for the 300 plus portraits that you see here today. And to get started, I'm going to read his artist statement, and then we'll get right into talking about what inspires his work, and the different kind of practices that he has as an artist. At the end, we'll take questions from you, so you can ask anything. And yeah, we'll go from there. You guys can come and go as you need, obviously. Just, you know, kind of dip out quietly if that's needed. Carl was born in rural Kansas and was raised in a town of 700 people, and there was a graduating class of 16. Following high school graduation, he left to complete his degrees in human biology and his MFA, Master's of Fine Arts, at the University of Kansas and the University of Michigan, respectively. Eventually moving to New York City, he found solace in the arts and culture in abundance. In 2012, Grauer committed his life to authentic pursuit to his passion of portraiture and art making. He has garnered success showing work internationally, including exhibiting with the Royal Society of Portrait Painters in London and being shortlisted for the Wells Contemporary Art Award in the United Kingdom. Carl Grauer is a painter based in Poughkeepsie, New York, and continues to work representationally within the concepts of time, space, ritual, and mortality. So Carl, welcome.
Thank you.
Yay, we can clap. We like clapping. And Carl has been a professor here at DCC for the last 2 years. So really quick, Carl, tell us what you teach here.
First, I'd like to say thank you to the college and for you, Lindsay, to host me and to host the show. And I really appreciate the time and the space to have been granted to show. So thank you. Also, I'd like to start by saying that I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to be a professor here at the college. And currently, I'm teaching fashion, illustration, and design in the spring semester. But I've also been teaching drawing 1 and drawing 2, and arts visual portfolio, which is a professional development class.
And you guys don't know this yet, but actually in the fall, he knows this. Carl's going to be teaching painting as well. So if you've got that class you want to take, obviously he knows what he's talking about. So Carl, tell us, I guess I read your bio, so a little bit about your background. Give us a little more insight into kind of where you started, how you started.
So I am, you know, obviously from Kansas. I grew up there, but I also was always interested in drawing. I say that I was drawing outside of the womb. So I was drawing constantly, and any kind of surface or material that I could draw on. Like if I was in the bathroom, I'd be drawing little sketches on the toilet paper. I'd hide behind my parents' wooden sofa, and I'd be carving in drawings into the wood furniture, which they didn't find until much after I graduated from high school. They weren't very happy about. But I have been drawing all along. In practice, I love it. I've always loved drawing, but I also had aptitude for other things like science, and so I was always kind of conflicted with what my interests were because I had so many different interests. And so from there, I ended up going to the University of Kansas. I always wanted to go to Lawrence and kind of have that experience living in that town, and was able to meet really wonderful people, like a roommate of mine that is here today. And so I'm very grateful to have had that experience, but also being exposed to many different kinds of thought and education, being in a liberal arts school. So my major was biology, but I also took many other classes like sociology and German and drawing and painting and things like that. And I eventually found interest in finding my kind of path, which was introduced to me by my high school art teacher, who I was very lucky to have because she was the same instructor that I had from kindergarten my senior year in high school. And so Mrs. Belton, Betty Belton, she was really literally a lifesaver for me. She was very welcoming and very much a person that developed me and guided me and gave me the space to be myself and let me be myself unapologetically. So she actually introduced me to a medical illustrator that was in the town over called Hays, Kansas. And Dr. Cody was someone that I was able to go and visit. And he introduced me to medical illustration and scientific illustration. So then that's what led me to University of Michigan, because that's where his degree was from. And so he kind of introduced me to that program. And so I started moving in that direction and focused my energy on learning how to illustrate better and studying anatomy and getting my degree eventually at the University of Michigan. Yeah.
So your graduating class was 16.
Yes.
I thought mine was small at 85. So how is that, like being in art in a small rural community? Did you have a lot of exposure to art? Did you?
No, I have to remind you too though, that was 16 people combined by 2 towns. So, so that was like Wilson and Dorrance together, and that made 16 students. So in grade school, my class was 11 people. But anyways, so the exposure to the arts was limited. I mean, there were really great grassroots programs. There was really great communities, like Lucas, Kansas had a very nice grassroots program. But most of my exposure, honestly, came from my high school teacher. She's the one that introduced me to like Edward Hopper and Matisse and Van Gogh and things like that, and introduced me to different kinds of media and making and craft and how to live a life as a maker. And so that was really, really truly my exposure. I didn't really fully get more involved and more knowledge until I went to Lawrence, and then having instructors and classes that brought me to museums like the Nelson Atkins or the Kemper Contemporary and things like that.
So did you end up working as a medical illustrator?
I did. I graduated from grad school and I ended up working as a medical illustrator. And that's what got me a job in New York City, and that's what kind of got me to New York City. So I got a job in medical illustration, but it was also during the time of the .com era, and I lost my job like literally 3 months after I moved, and I never got a paycheck. So that was a really frightening moment for me because I had put down a deposit on an apartment and I couldn't afford to pay my rent, and it was very scary. And so I scrambled really hard to find other work, and I literally got kicked out of my apartment, things like that. Like, so like really tough times. But then I found a job eventually as a graphic designer and illustrator with an advertising company. Yeah.
And so in your artist statement, you're talking about in 2012, you decided to really recommit to your life as a painter, as a portrait artist, to really kind of live authentically as a creative. Can you talk kind of about that shift? And then that's where the work starts. So for those of you who haven't been to the gallery yet, you start over here, and then the show goes around, and then once we put the walls back in place, so that starts 10 years ago.
Yes.
And then the show, the most recent stuff is in the center with what you've painted is, for the folks who've been sitting here at DCC are right over there. But tell us about kind of that shift for you.
Yeah, so I had been working in New York City, and I've been doing the hustle all along, working as a graphic designer, working as an illustrator, working in advertising, and then also running my own business, and kind of like starting my own business in antiques and gallery and things like that. But 2012, what really kind of like was the catalyst to me recognizing and addressing the fact that I needed to live a life a little bit more authentically to the way that I wanted to do was with the passing of my brother. So my brother passed away in 2012, and so it really kind of like put a jolt in me to really think about how I wanted to live my life, because it was so fleeting. It is fleeting at times, and so I corrected that kind of journey for myself and really sank within myself and said, what do I really want to do? And that was making art and making and drawing and painting, and I wanted to like really learn how to paint properly and really start thinking about how do I apply strokes? How do I become more painterly rather than so illustratively driven? And so in 2012, I was following this kind of like pursuit of getting better and training myself and practicing. And at that time, there was the concept of 10,000 hours. So I wanted to like put in my hours in order to get better. And
Can you further explain the 10,000 hours concept?
well, it's this theory that was around in the book. I don't even remember who wrote the book, unfortunately. But it was this theory that in order to be really good at something, you have to put in the time, the 10,000 hours of practice in order to get better at something. So it's not something that you just, it doesn't just come naturally like a lightning bolt from the sky. Like, you have to really put in the work and the effort to get better. And that involves making mistakes. That involves doing the practice in order to get better. And that means not always being perfect. You're not going to be perfect right away. And I don't want to be perfect either. I want to be imperfect. I want to continue to learn and grow and find different ways to be and to find ways in order to better myself, not only technically, but emotionally and physically, things like that.
So when you started doing the portraits and through the series, like, have you felt that growth, that all the way through?
Yeah, I mean, I always come, like, when it started, I always start with this particular practice with an intention. So I set an intention for what I wanted to achieve. And at the beginning, it was literally just, I want to get a portrait on in 2 hours. It was like, can I get a portrait in 2 hours? It was really difficult. So like, that was my intention. And as I was able to achieve that intention, then I would change my intention. And I would create another challenge for myself in order to get better at what my next intention was. It may have been like, I need to develop form better. I need to think about the temperature of my color. I need to think about what my foreground is, my background is. How do I create a scene? How do I create mood? How do I make a feeling from the portrait? How do I make someone feel sad? How do I make someone feel happy? What does pain look like when someone's smiling for 2 hours? You know, so like that kind of thing is like very much what drove my work, and also was also a really good way for me to invite someone in to my space and have a moment of 2 hours without distraction. So it was about having conversation and communing and having this moment with somebody else that was not this, it wasn't, you know, being distracted, it was about being present with someone and working on my craft and creating this ritual and sacred space together.
Did you ever worry, especially early on, or even now, that if it doesn't look like them?
I mean, of course. I mean, I'd be...
2 hours is a short time.
It's a short time. I mean, I would be remiss to say that I don't have the desire or the want or the need or the wish to make it look like them. But also, it was a practice that I was able to allow myself to set that aside and know that, like, it's not about doing a pretty picture. It was about practice. It was about having the time to make a portrait within the space in 2 hours. It became more about the ritual, about the process, than it was about the result. And for me, if I could set aside the result and set aside that need to be perfect, then I found some really happy accidents happen. I was able to find some things that were able to show itself to me, that if I was so distracted by making a perfect picture that it would ruin it, it would become like something that's not supposed to be, in my mind. Yeah.
And I think too that, like, sometimes trying to be perfect would take away that element of emotion that you're talking about. Like,
yeah, because we're not all perfect. Not everyone is perfect. If we were all perfect, it would be a boring existence. We'd all be very boring and very like rigid and very the same. So, but
well, I'm perfect. It's fine.
Well, at the same time, though, we're all perfect in all of our imperfectness. Like, you know, the perfection comes from all of our individual, like, little glitches. You know, we all have our own little, like, things that make us wonderful and make us individuals.
Yeah. And when we talked a little bit, one of the things, because we talked ahead of time, and I've sat for you several times, so, and as an artist myself, like, there's got to be an emotional impact to sharing that space with people for 2 hours, and especially because a good portion of the portraits that you did over quarantine. So you did them over video conferencing, you know. So can you talk a little bit about, like, how that maybe changed your practice, but also, like, that impact on you as the painter and sharing that space with that person? Because I think it would become quite intimate, or
yeah.
It could be.
Yeah, I mean, one of the I set up like different controls for myself as far as like it being kind of an experiment for myself on the scientific approach, which was one being that it had to be in 2 hours, and the second requirement for me in this process was it had to be live in person, painting from life. So up until, you know, the quarantine, of course, everything, all these portraits were painted from life. They were 2 hours with me in the same space with somebody else. And so then when COVID hit and we were all like kind of like, you know, then I had to really readjust my whole approach to making. And I was really sitting quietly with myself and being like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? How is my practice going to move forward with this particular project? So then I started opening it up to video conferencing and offering the space for someone to come and sit, especially for those that were alone or who were isolating alone or who didn't have someone else to be with. And on some level I thought, well, maybe this is a way that we can share time together and we can have a conversation and we can be there together in a way that is, I don't know, comforting, I guess, and being able to have a conversation. And so from that, then it just kind of spurned into like over 100 portraits that I did over video conferencing. It was a beautiful experience. It was a lot of me meeting different people and being able to be engaged with different kinds of people from all over the world, and that was a really blessing, a really big blessing. Yeah.
And I know you were actually featured on ABC News, right? Yeah. Sorry, like I have to give you the mad props because you're not going to do it. So they did feature your project.
Yeah.
Did that lead to more people from around the world signing up and making more connections?
Yeah, it did, but it also like led to, it was really, I'm very grateful for the exposure. It was really wonderful to have that like moment, but it also led to kind of like, I think, overexposure on some level where like it became something that it wasn't, where I think some people, like either it was bots or something like started getting a hold of my calendar list, and so people were signing up, but no one was showing up. And so that like kind of like agreement and what do you call it, like that contract of like signing up for something and following through, I was sitting there a lot, very like waiting, but people weren't showing up. So it started to become more, it became difficult.
Yeah.
You know, on some level. Whereas like if you have someone sign up in life, they usually show up, you know, because it's usually an agreement that happens that way. So I don't mean to talk badly about that scenario, but
I don't think it's badly. I think there's a certain amount of honesty to talk about that and say like, yes, it went great, and then there were these negatives, and that's, I think that's part of the process, right?
And learning how to adjust from that, and like being able to like turn to what works for you, being able to say, this is enough for me, I need to quit.
Yeah.
And so that's when I closed the book on that project in August, because it was like, it became something more and beyond than what I intentionally wanted it to be, which was based on sacred space, based on a ritual with another person, based on connection, based on practice. You know, so like with that, then I stopped doing the online portraits.
Yeah. And when did you resume doing the portraits in person?
With this exhibition.
Yay!
So
you took time off.
I took some time off, but I was also not painting. Like I was also working on some other work, because my work is broad and diverse in the fact that I have 3 different avenues of making. One being my 2-hour portrait practice, one being my like creative fine art gallery work, and then also my commission-based work. So I diversify the kind of labor that I do within my own practice, so that I'm never like without something to work on. I call this my true north because it always is what I recenter myself with whenever I'm feeling lost or whenever I'm trying to find another kind of idea or concept to work on. And so I always bring myself back to the practice and what it's all about with technique and the painterly aspect with this series.
Yeah. And it seems like for you it's really important to be making.
Yes.
And sometimes I think that can be hard, especially for like students, right? Like to just make something that's not going to be graded, or like, I can't talk all of a sudden.
No, but I know what you're saying.
Articulate until that point.
Yeah, it's all, for me, my phrase is always, it's always about the doing. Consistency and persistency. And so as long as I'm showing up to the board with consistency and I'm persistent in my practice, then I know that things will work out. So whenever I start to like not do, and that's when things like negative talk comes into my mind. That's when I start to be a little bit more negative. For me, it's a lot about my mindset and how I move forward, and I always find myself feeling better when I'm doing something, when I'm putting the effort forward, because that means there's a momentum that I'm creating for myself and my practice. And so for that reason, it is all in the doing. And I'll say that over and over and over to myself, it is all in the doing.
And if we could talk a little bit about some of the other areas of your artistic practice.
Sure.
Part of the doing, because we did it during the pandemic together, is you do landscape paintings.
Right.
Just kind of like a fun outing.
Yep.
And I know because that was a way for us to hang out as friends during the pandemic and still stay safe. But that led you into a series of landscapes. You just had a great solo show at Carrie and Dad in Hudson. Was it a solo show or a group show?
It was a group show, but
Okay.
I had my own space. So like I worked on a series of paintings that were based on memory and time and space. And so when I kind of closed my book on the Terra Portraits online, I moved over to watching and observing nature as it was changing in the space of my realm, of my home, and through the windows of my existence. And so I was taking note of the change of seasons through the change of the color of the leaves, or snowfall, or the melting snow, or the wind, or there was this gigantic coniferous tree across the street from our house, and so I was taking note of all the sunrises. And so with that segment, I started like documenting time passing, because I was also very interested in, I was taking time to like just kind of like reread some books and stuff, and I was reading The Time Machine. And so I was thinking about this particular, so then I watched the movie, and then I was thinking of this particular prose in the book, and also that was kind of referenced in the movie where they were looking across the street at a store window, and it was moving in fast forward, much like a time lapse, and all the dresses would come down, and all the fashions would change, and then the boards would clamber up, and then everything would fall apart, like, whatever. So I was just thinking about like this like time lapse of like time and space, and how we're like kind of paused in this like these like time machines and watching the world kind of pass us, and the birds were chirping. So like I started trying, I'm on a tangent now, but like I started putting that into my art. And so like I had this burning bush too that showed the passage of time from the summer, fall into winter, and things like that. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting the way you phrase that, because it feels like when you're doing the portraiture work here, you're the one passing the time. They are the constant, and that yet during lockdown and really you were the constant in your house, and the time was passing. So it's kind of a really interesting way that you see kind of like two circles moving in different directions, and the way that you utilize time in your work. And I know from seeing your paintings that they still utilize this kind of square format to show that passage of time. So it's an interesting kind of format connection between your work.
Yeah, and so like from the 2 art portraits, I was literally looking at these gridded portraits on my studio wall, and I was like, So I took like because I had a bulk of those boards in my studio, and I was like, I'm done with these 2 hours. And so like I took like one of those boards, and I started like putting it on my studio wall, because I was also teaching, and so teaching remotely, then that kind of took over all my space in my studio. So I had like literally like a small little corner in my studio that I could work from, and I wasn't able to work on large formatted paintings anymore. So I took that 12 by 12 and I put it on my thing, and I looked out the window, and I was like, blah, 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 blah. And so then I started like just doing that over and over and over and over and over again, because I needed to do the do. Like I needed to do it, do the do. So like that was like the whole thing for me. It was all about like I need to do this for myself and my practice. And so that format switched to, and the time thing for me is always really interesting too, because with the sittings, I have people that I've known for a long time who've sat for me multiple times. And that documentation of age will also start to take a role too. Like we'll start seeing the age of people who I know, and how that references through diversity of people of color, or people of age, or people of gender, or whatever that is. Like the thing to show this wave of people that come in and out, like the consistency of me sitting, and then the environment changes.
Yeah. And just on that, I mean, I'm in here 3 times.
Right.
I like to be painted. I'm like, I'll sit for you anytime. But we were talking about this the other day, like even for me as someone who sat for you, I sat for the first time for that painting. And I didn't know, I met you, but I didn't really know you. And to see kind of the change just over the last 3 years, it's not just my hair color either, has been really startling. But I also know that one of your main sources of inspiration is actually your husband, Mario.
Yes.
So.
I painted Mario many, many, many times. 3 times in this project, but like I painted him probably like 100 times.
So is it especially when you're talking about like, your husband, your intimate partner, you guys have been together quite a long time, and you've painted him throughout. So are you seeing even that more intimate aspect of what you were just talking about, like painting someone through this long spans of life.
I mean, I paint Mario every year, and I paint a self-portrait every year. So every year I'm documenting not only my husband, but myself, and like how we change, and you know, whatever that may be. What was it, 3 years ago, I painted him 12 times like the phase of the moon, because he has a really nice bald head. And so I wanted to do a really nice form study.
He's watching this screen, it's just like
but like, I wanted to show this change of phases of the moon, and like referencing how light shifts on form, but also like, it was kind of like an homage to the love that I have for my husband. So that was, yeah.
Yeah. We had that one moment. Whoa. Sorry. There's other things. Do you find that, like, when you're painting people, even over a longer period of time, like, is it difficult for the people you're painting to see themselves in art? Does that make sense? Like, to really sit for a painting and become art?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I can't guess.
Is it hard for you to become art?
No, I love to sit for art. I've sat for other people, and I love to see someone's interpretation of what I would like. I can't guess what other people. I mean, I've had people respond where they didn't like it. I've had people respond where they're, you know, all factions of ways that people respond to whether or not they like or not. I've had the really great compliments, and I've had the like, I don't like it. So, you know, and everything in between. But ultimately, like, people are not going to like show everything how they feel. But I do think that what's really interesting about these portraits and portraiture in general is that it's kind of like thrice removed. So it's not a picture, right? And it's not a mirror image, but it's like them being painted through my eyes. So it's like, it's a remove, it's not real, right? So however realism you go, like it's still an interpretation, and it's through many conduits.
And in especially this practice here, you talked initially about like some changes that you made to keep it different, different goals that you have. But I know recently you've switched to acrylic paint. How has that been like a shake up in your practice and I don't know if you've used it before, but learning or relearning a material, like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a shift, and there are some things that were definitely a struggle, but I kind of took to it, to be honest. I kind of took to it. I've used acrylic in the past. I haven't used a lot. I practiced in oil primarily. I was consider myself an oil painter, and that's how I documented it. But within the past year, I've had some health issues that have changed that kind of approach, and also in this space too, like it needed to be non-toxic. So I switched to acrylics, and it's been great. I love it. I mean, honestly, it's like I can't really complain about it. I mean, the cleanup is really easy, and I can get really chromatic saturation with it. I can get certain things that are very punchy. But yeah, I mean, there was a change. I mean, there was an adaptation. I did a couple of portraits before I came into the gallery and did them in life, and it was not good. But I kept going, so yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I like that you said that. Like, sometimes you make the stuff that's not good.
Right. Yeah, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that's good. That's what I want to do. I want to be vulnerable in my movement and in the act of doing, because if I gave up on every bad painting or every bad picture that I drew, then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I would be doing something else. So it's like, yeah, okay, so it happened bad, move on. Who cares? Like, what do I learn from this? What was it that went wrong, and how do I approach it the next time to improve upon what I did this time? Because every time I make a mistake, I'm kind of grateful, because I'm like, oh, okay, I learned something, and that's really half the battle.
As you said it, I said it kind of more than now.
Yeah.
Those of you that were alive in the 80s, you understand that reference. 90s? 80s, 90s. The one thing I thought, were you trying to raise your hand for a question, Wapiscu? Because we'll take questions later.
Yeah, no.
Okay. one of the reasons when we were talking about a show for you, and I was like, I want your portraits, is for a lot of what you're talking about, that it is that practice. It's a sustaining practice, one that you've had for a long time. But also, I think it's Chuck Close has this really great quote. That's something, this is a abbreviation of it. Or not, whatever that word is. Kind of like, you know, artists don't wait for inspiration. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us get down to work. You do it, today you do what you did yesterday, tomorrow you do it today, or you did today, and eventually you'll get somewhere. And I find, you know, having been in your studio, seeing these portraits, seeing them on social media, that's really, that idea is, you really embrace that concept. And I thought it was really powerful, especially for a gallery that has obviously an educational component to it, like to show the students and the folks that come around here. And I know this is the first time all of your portraits have been up together in one space. So how's that feeling then?
Feels great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels wonderful. It is kind of overwhelming when I got them all up and was able, got them up and I was walking around the space by myself. It was good. It felt kind of emotional to see all these memories, and as I was putting them up too, I had people I painted that had passed away, and so it was really emotional for me on that level too, because it was like seeing old friends and dear friends, and so memory again came back with every conversation. It was like I remembered what we talked about. I remembered kind of things like senses of like what the air smelled like, or what music we're listening to, or what I served as a snack, you know, things like that. Those things were kind of popping back in my head, and it was like time travel. So, yeah.
So in many ways, all these portraits are kind of like a portrait of you.
Well, I would say that it's a portrait of my progress and my improvement and technique. I think it's more about them. I originally used to say that it was a portrait of myself, but I really want to step away from that kind of conversation, because it really is about the process, and it's about the people that I've painted. So for me, it's documenting process, and so it is a documentation process.
Yeah. What's interesting though is, as a viewer, at least for me, it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like I'm flipping through a sketchbook. It really does feel like a body of work that has a lot to say.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome. Because I think that there is a difference between a sketching practice, that thing you do just to keep going, and a body of work. And I think that it's great to see how you progress that. So yeah, you might see it that way, but it makes a pretty damn good show. I did want to talk a little bit too, and I know we're referencing work that's not here, but Carl has such a diverse practice that I want to talk about it. So shout out here that you can check out his work on his webpage and on his Instagram. So it's just carlgrauer.com, right?
Yep, everything's Carl Grauer. Instagram is Carl Grauer. Facebook, Carl Grauer. Website, carlgrauer.com, and that's Grauer and Carl to see. So, yeah.
And we have plenty of cards if you don't have one before you head out, but we're not done yet. But I know that in some of the work that you also do, you know, while doing this, you did a great series called The Lavender Temple, and I know it has a longer title.
Yeah, The Lavender Temple. Oh, gosh, I'm done.
So it was a big switch.
I know. My brain is in it. A Lavender Temple, and yeah, we'll just call it The Lavender Temple. It'll come to me in a moment, because there's fabulousness in it, and yeah.
Yeah, so I know in that piece you focused on doing paintings of influential queer activists.
Yeah, so I did a series that was in 2019, and it was an honor and celebration of queerness, and that being a queer person and being raised in an environment where that history or that conversation was never really present at all or allowed. I didn't know my history, and I didn't know the people that did the labor for us to have marriage, to have this equality that we have. so it was important for me to kind of honor these figures. And so I was raised evangelical and very Christian, and so I found inspiration through the language and the visual language that was used in order to honor certain saints and martyrs, but would not include us in that same conversation. So I took that visual language and I put the people that I felt had influence in my life as I did my research, especially in my young adulthood, of certain people like Mayor Rustin or James Baldwin or Audre Lorde or Harvey Milk or others that I'm blanking on because I can't even remember the title of my own experience. But I was Stormy De La Berry and Del Martin and Barbara Giddings and all these activists that did this work. And so like I wanted to honor their faces and put them up and show them and have a written verbiage about what they did and who they were. And so I made this series of work and it was shown in like a very sacred space, very private and very honorary, and it was up for the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion. So it was signified by a certain time and place.
Yeah. That had to be pretty powerful as well.
Yeah, it was very powerful for me to do and to exercise in that thing, because it was also like, it started, sorry, I'm going to backpedal just a little bit, because the process started too because of Matthew Shepard, right? And so Matthew Shepard was someone that was very like, it hit me hard in my youth because he was about the same age as me and he was murdered, and you know, both Midwestern kids in college and all this stuff. So I identified with him because of that experience. And so I had an artist residency that was in Wyoming, and it happened to be at the same time as the 20th anniversary of his murder. And so I was able to go to the college and listen to the lectures and meet the people that were witness to those experiences and ask the questions. And so from that series was born, because I was thinking about how do I honor that experience as my youth and how that affected my own personal identity as a gay person.
Yeah. And for those of you who might not know, he was murdered for being gay, except for the younger members in the audience. And as you said that, and again, some of these things I hadn't heard before, so it's almost like in many ways, starting with that series, you become a storyteller. And we don't necessarily have the words, we don't need the words, but each of these portraits tell a story. Is that something that you're conscious of, that you...
Yeah, I think that I am always interested in the story. I'm always interested in the story. I like to read, I've always liked to read. I've always liked to hear a story or tell a story. I love to tell a story.
That's why we're friends. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it is storytelling, but it's also, it's also pictures. It's also like language, and how do we create language with visual elements.
So, also with a show like this, I mean, I would imagine some of these folks might be tuning in, they might be sitting here. You're creating a great community, right?
Yeah.
So, we talk a lot as artists about that need for community, whether that's someone to work with or whatever. So, can you talk a little bit more about, like, maybe that influence on your sphere of community?
Community is very important. Having someone be able to, you can call up and say, hey, I'm going through this. Someone to kick you in the butt and be like, what have you been doing? Or someone just to like be with. Someone to create community, and you and I know this, like having a community to go paint together, having friends that you can call who are also in the creative world, having people around that are there for you. Because it can be very lonely as an artist, and making sometimes, it's very solitary. You're in your studio, you're kind of doing it, you're like, It's important to have community in order to build yourself, because you can't do it on your own. And it really does take a village. So, however that is, especially for the young students, like find your community. That's where you find your community, is with your classmates. Have your conversations, build a network with your classmates now, because those kind of relationships will bloom in
too, to be like, this piece is terrible. Help me.
Honesty.
Right.
Honesty is really important, please. Just honesty. If someone can come and tell me, like, this is crap, I'm very grateful. Because honestly, like, I need to hear that. Like, we all need to hear that. And, like, I would much rather have that and be like, and then the why after, you know, to have, like, you know, so that, not even say, like, this is crap, but, like, to be like, this isn't really working and this is what I might consider doing. You know, you can take it or leave it. But that's important to have in order to build and grow.
Yeah, and again, for the students here, we talk about that, and we talk about that for such an important reason. And I think being a part of a campus community, you know, all of us as instructors are friends. Most of us, and I'm just joking. Bad joke. Right? Like, we depend on each other in that way, and for us, that's the way the community is made. So that's why we're like, you know, do your Discords, do all that, because these are the people that make up those support systems when you leave college. But also, you know, meeting other folks through the process of work. Which, you know, I don't think any of us understood how important that would be until we went into the pandemic and lockdown. And you know, did that, I know we don't work like beating over the head with the pandemic stuff, but did you do other paintings during the lockdown? Did you?
Yeah, I did that whole series
of
the landscapes. Did these, I did some commission-based work, and yeah, and then just a lot of it was just drawing too, just like sitting down and drawing and playing, finding the time to play, which was really important.
And I kind of have one more section of questions really quick, and then we'll get to questions from you guys, which is like that business of being an artist, because I think you're very good at that. You know, your website, Carl has a gallery book you guys can take a look at over here. You did all the statements for everything. And what we don't talk a lot about as artists is that ending. You are marketing yourself.
Well, we've all seen that like little diagram, right, on Instagram or whatever. It's like being an artist, and there's like a little sliver that's like actually making the art. It's very true. It's like that whole, you know, you have to be your own, you know, writer. You have to be your own web maker. You have to be your own, you know, personal secretary. You have to be your own, you know, whatever it is. Like, you have to always do the work all around everything else, like clerical work. And so I treat it like a job. I treat it like a job. You know, I have my days where I designate for doing my email blasts. I have my days that's clerical. I have my days that I'm like, I always try to paint every day though. So like, it's like maybe in the morning, and then I'll teach, and I'll go home, and then that will be my web day, or, you know, something like that. Like, I'm always doing something, and I'm always working and researching, and then to time and play too on top of that. So that's kind of really hard, but I love it. I love the work. I love everything about it. So sometimes, you know, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
Or you work harder.
Or you work harder.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, it's a full thing, the full gamut. So I don't know. For that, I appreciate. I never get bored. So that's a big positive to it.
And I know this has kind of come up in discussions with other students. So this show ends tomorrow, sad face. But we've got a great new show coming up. And so keep an eye on our social media and in classes. We'll tell you about it soon. But some people have been like, oh, I would have loved to have modeled, but it didn't fit in. Like, can we still contact you to be painted, or are you going to take a break again?
The models that the sitting in line are done, right? I'll fully look at this tomorrow. However, I do take sittings, but at this point I'm doing it sparingly, and when it's in my schedule, but also I'm not doing it over video conferencing. I'm returning back to my original intent with the project, and that where it's in person. So if anyone is local or in the area and they want to sit for me, reach out, and so if we can find a time together, then that would work.
I just saw a couple people like, hey. And I will say, just because I was up here yesterday, I think the most hilarious painting in this entire show is the one with Jack.
Oh, yeah. I had a student come in on yesterday and came in a full duck onesie that was right on.
I thought like the freshly purple hair, no, the duck onesie tops it. But there's also just like people coming as they are and being really authentic to themselves, and Oscar is dying. Go ahead. No, don't apologize.
I painted portraits before, and my mother got really ecstatic when I started making portraits. But I always, whenever I was like going to do a portrait, I've always been told, "Oh, don't paint this on me. I hate this. Or I don't like how my face looks in this angle." I can fix for that, but it's when people tell me not to draw certain aspects that I find really charming. When you're doing this project, do you feel like there's a lot of people coming up to you like, "Oh, don't paint this scar on me. I don't like that," or don't, or don't like paint me this way?
I've had people ask me that before. That's a really good question because
Hold on one second, Linda, sorry.
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question? So there are sign language interpreters listening to the lecture and interpreting for a student, but they can't hear you. So would you mind repeating the question? I'm sorry.
So the question was whether or not I've had people ask me to remove certain things about themselves that they didn't like, and how I handled that and the way that I would approach it. And I have been asked that before. And there's times where I listen with sensitivity, but I also within this particular practice, it's about realism for me. So it's also celebrating the things that are us, and it's a great conversation about appreciating and loving the things that make us unique, right? So for me, there's that quote of warts and all, So that's the kind of thing that I approach making art with, is that I celebrate and appreciate everything about what is real. And so that's the way that I approach my art, and I'm not really into doing filters or photoshopping or things like that. So yeah, it's just a conversation. If they don't want to have their portrait painted, then that's fine. They can find someone else that are willing to do that, for sure. But I love the way people look.
So my question is a little bit of a hypothetical, I guess.
Sure.
Say all the paint in the world goes dry. You don't have any access to paint. What medium would you switch to make the portraits?
What medium would I switch to? Okay, so if all the paints in the world were to dry up and there was no access to them, and I was to pick another medium to paint with, I would do probably a form of collage. I would probably rip up some magazines or rip up some, color swatches from, Lowe's or something like that. I would find another way to do it. And maybe I would do sculpture. Maybe I would render myself into some tools. So whatever that looks like, yeah, I would make it work. Absolutely.
I'm sure some of these color theory students would be like, "Take my coloring, I never want to see it again."
I didn't really see had a question.
Have you ever, if you got a picture and you ever just, didn't use it, trashed it or something?
Oh, yeah. Okay, have I ever done a picture and I just trashed it and didn't use it? Is that the question? Yes. Many times. There have been works that I've thrown in a fire. There was, at the end of undergraduate school, there was a ritual that was a portfolio burning. And so whenever the works that we didn't like and that didn't make it into our final portfolio, we would have a bonfire and we'd throw all the pieces into the fire. So yes, definitely. Throw it in the duckling bucket.
Hi. So my question is, was there an artist who made you commit to this medium? Was there a reason why oil painting and painting in general, was there a reason why painting?
Okay, the question is that, was there a certain artist that inspired me to work in oils and to move into oil painting? My art teacher in high school, she really encouraged me to go into oil painting, but there's other artists that do influence me. There's David Hawking's big influence, although he works in acrylic. But David Hawking influences me, Alice Neal really influences me. An artist called Polorego influences me. I could go on and on and on. Gwen John is also a painter that I really like, that I found and influences me. Sargent, I can't go without mentioning Sargent. But with this series, it just clicked to me that question was that there was was an artist that I found in the Chicago Museum of Art who did a series of paintings towards the end of their life, Ivan Albright, and they were known to have painted the portrait of Dorian Gray for the movie in the 30s, and so he did a series of self-portraits that were over a span of time towards the end of his life. And so that was like where time clicked into my brain. And so Ivan Albright was also a really big influence for me too as well.
Other questions?
So I find typically with my art, when I change from medium to medium, even just from oil to acrylic to watercolor, my style drastically changed and I have to adapt to some things. So did you find you have to alter your style when you change from oil to acrylic and like maybe account for the much quicker drying time or just anything in general, how you found these sort of changes and you paint people?
Okay, that's a good question. So like switching from medium, like if I were to switch from oil to acrylic, how that might change my style and how would I adapt it to the medium shift. So yeah, I mean, I think I did have to adapt, definitely. I think my mark making remained the same. I think the way that I laid a mark remained the same. But I definitely did see a shift in how color worked for me because I had to adapt between oil painting, which was true to the color, right? So like you would put it down and the color really wouldn't shift. But like with acrylic painting, when you laid down a blue, it was much lighter when it was dry versus when it was wet. And so that process for me was very much advantageous on some level for me because I was allowed to let my contrast and shadow and light kind of become more contrasty, which served me because I struggled with that at times. But yeah, good question.
Anything else?
I have a question. I don't want to reveal your age, but I know that you grew up in a pre-internet era, as I did. And I wonder if you know, or if you have any insight into what the art scene is like in your hometown these days for young people growing up in Kansas.
I do. This is a great question. So the question was, is that I grew up in Kansas, and because I'm 47 years old, am I aware of what the art world is like in my hometown. So because I know the art world in my hometown is because one of my closest friends in high school, Amanda Nelson now, her sister is the art school teacher in my hometown. And so I get insight into what Christine Schlechter is doing. Hello, Christine, if you're watching. If you know what she's doing. So she is a very, very talented artist. And one thing that she orchestrated and brought forth was the largest Czechoslovakian egg in all of Kansas. And so my art teacher was very versed in Slavic egg painting. Mm-hmm. And Christine was a mentor, or she was the mentor to my friend, my high school friend. And so she has carried on that tradition in our hometown. And so she orchestrated and made and erected the largest Czechoslovakian painted egg in the state. And it's amazing! Yes. You can actually Google it on Google Earth, Wilson, Kansas, Czech egg. And it is awesome. Yes, she's very talented and she's very, very good at what she does. So, yeah. And also there's like the grassroots art organization in Central Kansas is actually really strong. There's been, Lucas, Kansas has some really great grassroots, and that's Grassroots Arts Center, and that's like about 10 miles north of the hometown. Good question, thank you.
Anyone else?
I just have one thing, which I guess is more of a comment, but I just, as a different kind of artist, also in my 40s, I just find this so incredibly brave that you switched mediums in a very public way for this gallery. I find it extraordinary.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's just really impressive. You're like, man, I will switch mediums and I will
process too, though. I believe in being transparent, and particularly with this project, not necessarily other projects, but like with this project, it's about being transparent in my process. So that's part of it, right? And so it's like this is again documenting the shift in my reality and the reality of what it is to be an artist and a maker.
And I did actually give him an out when we talked. We were getting the show together, and we had to make sure we could paint in here because of COVID regulations and things like that. And when you were switching, I was like, if you don't want to do that, that's okay. If your child's trying to figure it out, and you're like, nope, I'm doing it. And I was like, better person than I was, because I would have been like, thank you, I'm gonna dip.
Me too.
Right? Because you really did put yourself out there in terms of like it could have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And you can't just like not include somebody who sat for you, but then where's my painting? Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing, though. It's like, go forth bravely, I guess. Like, be vulnerable.
Yeah. And I think that's particularly difficult, especially in the age of the internet. Yes, it can connect you, like you mentioned, but
Thank God the internet didn't exist.
But also, I mean, do you ever, just thinking of this, like, I love finding, like, my old work from, like, drawing one, and I'll post it and just be like, here you go. Let's keep me humble, right?
Yeah.
Like, but you guys, especially now, you're putting your artwork out there, so they're doing the same thing you're doing, they're putting it out there very bravely.
Yeah. Well, that's part of being an artist, too. It's like, why are we making it then? That's the question. It's like, if we're making it, then why? It's to share and to be part of the conversation. That's the thing that I like seeing is like, I want to see what everyone's doing. What are you talking about? What's your story? I want to see it. I love it. I love to see what other people are saying because that's what creates culture. So.
Yeah. All right, anything else?
I have a question. This is stunning. It's just a beautiful presentation. But I wonder if you could talk about the process of setting the gallery, of arranging the photos for the gallery. I don't imagine the work for the gallery. I don't imagine that was randomly set up. Did you move things around a lot? Did you have a plan for how you were going to present it?
Do I need to repeat it or no?
No.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's a great question.
Process for.
That's a great question because actually, I'm a little bit anal, and by a little bit I mean a lot. So I asked for the floor plans from Lindsay, and I calculated how many portraits there were, what the square footage was, how many portraits, and I did a lot of reiterations on my tracing paper of how to get every single portrait to fit in a grid. And so it was kind of crazy, and Kristen, who helped hang as well as Lindsay, knew that I was very So having, even moving from a 3-row to a 4-row format was kind of really jarring for me. But I let it happen because that was the only way that I could fit all the quarantine portraits on the 4 walls. So, yeah. That's a good question. And now you get an insight into my...
And just in terms of from the gallery perspective, some artists are just like, hey, do whatever you want. I knew Carl was not like that, which was great because honestly, it was less work for me. I don't know about Kristen, but
extremely.
yeah. So, and then he's able to really curate the vision that he wants. So it's really dependent sometimes on the artist you work with and how it flows. And I would come in and I'd be like, so how's it going? He would say, oh, what about this? What about that? And then I would dip, right? Because I knew that he had a vision, and I didn't really want to influence that too much. But I also knew if I stayed too long, it really would be a hindrance. So, but that's also because we are friends personally, so I knew him in that way. And
but that also came from a college professor in a sculpture class who really nailed it into me about presentation is 90%. And so I hear Professor Swindell in the back of my head constantly whenever I have a show or whenever I exhibit any kind of work, presentation is 90%. And that, to the end of the world, I will always hear when I'm putting And so I will say that to my students over and over and over.
So eventually you'll have a little Carl on your shoulder.
I hope.
I'm sorry, Carl, but Lindsay got to meet her.
Jess?
So I have a logistical question. How do you store these, and like, do you have how much space do you have for storing all of your work? Like, what is the scale of your studio?
Well, these are, okay, that's a really good question about how I store my art and store my art portraits. So they, thankfully, are all the same size.
Yeah.
So I put them together in little boxes that I put in my basement. So I'm trying very hard after I break this down to actually do it in a more proper archival way. So I will be wrapping them in acid-free paper and wrapping them in brown paper and then putting them in boxes, and then I'll be storing them again in our basement. But they do take up a large amount of space.
I have a question related to your presentation is 90%. So do you feel differently now it's presented in this format rather than in boxes? You know, like do you feel like has it made you see it differently in this format?
That's a good question. The question is how I view the work now all together versus in a box. Yes, I see it very differently in the way that I presented them in the past, where they were always like edge to edge, and they were like smashed together. And having the space to show them all up in this space, there's 6 inches of space in between each portrait, and so having that space and air around everything has really changed the way that I'll probably move forward with exhibiting them in the future. And having them all together for me is like mind-blowing.
Right,
I can't say how grateful I am to the gallery and to the school for allowing me to do this, because it really has solidified what's in here versus like what's in the box. Yeah.
So what does the 6 inches change for you?
Okay, the question is how much does the 6 inches change for me? And I feel like it honors each portrait because it allows space. And so before it seemed more like static, then it felt like a Zoom nightmare versus like an actual exhibit, you know? Like that's I think for me, because the space allows this like each one has its sacred space that isn't interrupted.
Anything else?
You mentioned you have a partner. When you're doing this, like when you have your work, and is he an artist too, or is, because my boyfriend, he's a writer, so whenever he sees my artwork, he wants to tell me that it's good, but he really doesn't know how.
Okay, that's a good question. As far as like asking about, you know, a significant other and whether or not, since we're not an artist, and being able to have that communication between the two. So
he sees your work more than anyone else, probably.
I think the thing for that, number one, I'm very lucky and privileged to have a partner that supports me and gives me positive feedback and allows me the space to make the work. 2, he wouldn't call himself an artist, but I would call him an artist because he does embroidery and he does fashion and other things. But he is also a writer. But with our relationship, as it grew, so did his ability to communicate and talk about the work, because it was an education for him as I grew and as he grew and as we grew together. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes he doesn't have the words for it, nor does he have the time for it, and that's fine. And other times he's like really on board and has a lot of good input, and I will always go to him and ask him, what do you think about this piece? Because I know that he will always give me an honest reply.
Thank you.
Well, these have been really great questions.
Thank you.
And we're getting close to our ending time. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone else has any other questions, Otherwise, I would just, again, like to thank you, Carl, for doing the artist talk, for having this amazing show here. Every time I come in, which is almost every day, I find something else to enjoy, to look at, to explore that story of that person or what I think that story might be. So I love that this is an exhibit that every time I come, I find something new. And really appreciative of you bringing all of that here to share with the students and for the folks that are online.